My favorite Christmas movies and I would like to welcome you back to When to Use Wednesday. I'm Drew Hardesty, the founder and CEO of Wonderboy Media, and this week we're going to be talking about when to use certain frame rates when producing iPhone videos. First, let's talk about what frame rates are and why they matter. A frame rate is basically the amount of pictures your camera takes per second, or frames per second. So for example, if you're shooting 30 FPS or 30 frames per second, your iPhone is taking 30 images per second to give the illusion of motion in the video. Different frame rates create different visual effects. So for example, a lower frame rate, like a 24 frames per second, will create that cinematic quality, movie quality style video that we all know and love. Or shooting in a higher frame rate, maybe 120 frames per second, gives you that buttery smooth slow motion video. Choosing the right frame rate really depends on the kind of video you're making and the story you want to tell. Slower frame rates bring drama and nostalgia to your video, while faster frame rates bring intensity and action to your video. First on the list is 24 FPS, which is the gold standard in cinematic quality video. 24 frames per second, you're creating a natural motion blur that our eyes are used to seeing. And that's why it looks so good when we go to the movies and see these big cinematic productions. If you're going for that more professional cinematic vibe, then using 24 frames per second makes your video feel more polished and intentional. To set your iPhone to 24 frames per second, open your camera, select video format, and select 24 FPS. Pair this with some cinematic lighting, some really good composition, and you're well on your way to creating a Hollywood-style video right on your iPhone. Next, let's talk about 30 frames per second. This is the most common frame rate for everyday videos and broadcasts. It's smooth, clear, natural looking. In addition, live streaming platforms like Zoom or YouTube or Facebook even typically default to 30 frames per second, so it's a great frame rate to use when live streaming. Moving on to 60 frames per second. This frame rate is a game changer when it comes to fast-paced or high-energy scenes. You might use 60 frames per second when capturing dynamic scenes like a fitness program at a wellness center, or fast-paced ambulance emergency services training. 60 frames per second will give you more images per second, which is less motion blur and more detail. Now let's talk about 120 frames per second, which is your go-to frame rate when shooting those slow motion shots. This frame rate captures so much detail that you can slow down the footage dramatically and still maintain that detail. Slow motion can be a great tool for emphasizing specific moments. So for example, you want to focus on a surgeon's hands during a demonstration, or the certain mechanics of a piece of medical equipment. Filming that moment in slow motion at 120 frames per second can really add emotional weight to your video. To use this frame rate on your iPhone, switch to the slow-mo mode on your camera settings and select 120 frames per second. You can adjust the playback speed in post-production to give that dramatic effect. Knowing when to use each of these frame rates can elevate your videos from good to great. Thanks for joining me on this episode. If you like these tips and tricks, don't forget to like and share and follow me here. And as always, happy filming, whatever frame rate you choose.